Howdy, my name is Liana. I am a metalsmith and illustrator from the Memphis area, and today I want to do something that's kind of new for me, which is to record my analysis of some of the stills I took from the Legacy MV by DPR Live. This will not be any sort of functioning formal critique, and I didn't want to dive super deeply into theories or concepts, but more how the choices in composition and color affect the scenes. And so with my visual art knowledge, I wanted to see how much I could apply toward film, which I don't have much particular experience or skill set associated with. This will read more like a PowerPoint. I don't have all too many editing and recording tools at my disposal, and unfortunately I am hindered even further because my Yeti microphone won't register when I plug it into my computer, so I have to troubleshoot that. So today we are going to be dealing with my lovely headphone microphone, so we will see how this plays out. Bear with me. The first scene I wanted to address a little was the opening sequence that depicts a space phenomena. It also can be representative of eyes opening, whether that's Live's eyes or the viewer's eyes. I thought that was a nice sequence to start the MV as a whole. After the introduction, we're given this secondary introduction to the storyline itself. We are presented with two main focal points that both cut inward at roughly 45-degree angles. This engages in most of our 9 sections, 8 out of 9. If you are to cut in rules of thirds as a grid mark, and you can see with the blue arrows I have indicated those 45s and how the cylinder in the background breaks up that space using its vertical and near horizontal edges. As far as our color palette, we are presented with an overall cool blue tone. This is reflected in a less saturated way in the monitor and the underside of Live's glove. Permeating from the left, we have this cool pink tone, which is not quite a warm versus cool, as it is a cool pink, but we still read pink as one of the warm colors much of the time, so it's sort of a transitionary color or a transitionary color set to the much warmer burnt red that we see in Live's sleeve. So you should recognize this scene from the illustration I presented you with at the beginning, or if you've seen my speed paint video or follow me on Instagram or anything like that. And I wanted to sort of go into and elaborate on why this was an appealing composition to work with. Once again, we have a cool light source pushing against a warm one, and in this case they are orange and blue, which are one of the 3 primary complementary color palettes. Orange and blue is really my favorite of the color palettes visually. No matter the saturation, it's always visually pleasing. You'll see this in sunsets on beaches where the ocean meets the sky, or even at sunsets when the sky transitions from pinks and oranges to blues and purples. So we're given a range of complementary and near complementary colors. Reoccurring in this MV, you'll see Live is confined in a lot of spaces, and there's a lot of emphasis in solitude and tackling things on his own. When you reapply our rule of thirds, you'll notice this arch created by the backmost paneling, and this obviously has the walls arcing over Live, but this really emphasizes his constraint, like an overbearance of weight. And you'll also notice there's movement in his pose, mirroring the curvatures visible in the walls, the ladder rungs, etc. The 45 angles cutting in from our upper corners again juxtapose the curves presented elsewhere in the shot. Live himself sits pretty in our golden ratio, which I have applied over his shoulders and legs. This is a highlighted focus in a fair portion of art history, especially the European Renaissance. You could easily find this in many places throughout the video, but it's very apparent in this one where all of the emphasis is on this sort of restraint he's in within the confined space. With the following section, I will break down a series of shots that highlight Live's solitude and confinement to the ship, and how that interacts with the viewer. In this shot, Live is presented with a halo of warmth around him via the backlighting, while the cold blue lights towards the foreground act to frame the edges, but also indicate that the space Live approaches will also be one that is a cold and empty environment. In our middle ground, we have an earth tone acting as a point of transition, which reads visually as a muted green, but is actually a desaturated tone of this marigold hue I have included in the top border. For this close-up shot, Live once again walks away from our light source, and his body breaks up the light while the edges of the doorway act as parentheticals to articulate Live's importance in the composition. Our 45s interrupt our horizontal and vertical lines again and push our depth of space, while Live's gaze off to his right indicates the existence of an unexplored space to the viewer. Line of sight in 2D art, and I'm assuming is no different for film, works to pull viewer gaze across the composition, and with this, the imagined space can be expounded upon in the viewer of the minds rather than be confined to the parameters of the screen's edges. This shot introduced a few new aspects that we have not discussed yet. As with before, our backmost door provides the basis for Live's path, but previously his only option was to advance toward the fourth wall or the viewer. However, this time he's at an intersection of paths within the ship. This perpendicular path introduces a space that Live can interact with that the viewer cannot. This perspective is not available to us. We are left trusting his actions as the ominous red light warning cuts in. I'm always a sucker for limited color palettes, so I wanted to address the monochromatic color scheme implemented here to indicate danger. I used my eyedropper tool to give an example of the range of red tones and tints that make up this scene, which are used to elicit this feeling of urgency. In this tilting shot, Live's solitude is of course heavily pronounced again. This cross-section that Live stands in lies in the centermost section of our rule of thirds, which works both to push open the dark empty space encompassing, while the isolating halo of light and red panel lights compress the immediate space around him. As Live prepares to evacuate, he is still presented in the red palette indicative of impending danger, while the hatch behind him is a soft glow of muted green, and this provides a sense of security, further emphasized by the complementary relationship of red and green. As Live ejects himself from the ship, he enters this green-blue monochrome, successfully transitioning from the imminent danger to an escape. This marks Live escaping the confining walls of the ship, and for the first time, the viewers are granted access to follow him and share his passage from constraint to this sort of vastness presented before both the viewer and Live. I decided on skipping the freefall simply because there was so much to take in visually, and I wanted to save a little time for me, personally, selfishly, in this video. So once Live lands, we are given a shifting focus of his hand in the sand. The majority of the composition follows this 45-degree angle running from the top right to the bottom left, but I wanted to talk about this tiny triangle created in the upper left here. It's a small detail of composition that does a lot. Aside from depth and focus, this disruption is a glimpse of a planar change that suggests Live is in fact on an inclined surface and that the camera is not just tilted, as with other scenes that we've seen already. The limited color palette here is also really nice. It uses widely varied levels of saturation. With the lime tints in the sand, they give a sort of otherworldly feel, which allows us to subscribe to the notion that he has landed on a different planet from Earth, and the sand sets up well against these deeper earth tones presented in his hand and the limited dark cool tones of his sleeve. To backtrack a little, I wanted to discuss the suspension tank scene separately so that I didn't interrupt our previous flow of discussion, but we are drawn towards odd numbers, especially groupings of threes. You see this in storytelling, 3 wishes, 3 blind mice, 3 fairy godmothers, and within visual art and compositions, we tend to choose an odd number of flowers in a vase, an odd number of people in a setting. These are more visually interesting to us than perfect symmetry for the most part, and in this still we are presented with 3 objects of focus. The tubes stemming from the center apparatus function to disrupt the overwhelming presence of vertical lines, while also giving the illusion of functional machinery, which is just good set design. The slight tilting of the parenthetical objects pull all of the space and line of sight to Live's silhouette, which creates a loose symmetry in the screen, but still creates enough varying interest to pull our eyes around the page. Here, Live circles the tank. The mechanism and Live only fill half of the screen, however, the rule of thirds still applies over this composition. This separates the full span of the screen, and with the void further isolates him by compressing him toward the right. I put the next shots I want to talk about together for direct comparison because there is a dichotomy present. But first I wanted to present this example that I pulled from a sequence of close-up shots. In visual art, triangles represent stability, and the angles of his limbs create stability in the composition, which is supported by the confidence he exudes in the scenes versus ones depicting his struggles. This is counterbalanced by the angles of the point where the walls meet the ceiling to keep the composition dynamic. An inverted triangle demonstrates precariousness, as we see with Live panicking and lashing out. Conversely, when the camera stabilizes, creating vertical lines, so does Live. This scene alternates between hysteria and calm acceptance cyclically, as one might experience when battling internal struggles or mental illness. This series of shots closes out with Live acceding to his current state. With almost no lighting to define him, there is a sense of lost self and possibly contemplation or acceptance. The mechanisms encircle him, and as he sits between them and the fourth wall, he is secluded and restrained, which could represent an ultimatum of his state of mind at this time. These were the shots I decided to break down from this MV. They were overall the most visually appealing, and I wanted to discuss them. This is my first time making this kind of content, so I'm fully open to constructive criticism on how to improve, aside from equipment, which I already know is lacking. But let me know what works, what doesn't work, and what other MVs you might want me to take a look at. If you would like to keep up with my art, I do post regularly on Instagram, and I try to post weekly on YouTube. My Instagram is @LA_Pierce. I make mostly wearable art and portraits while mixing in other media as well. So that's the best place if you want to keep up with me. So thank you for tuning in, and give me any feedback that you might have. Thank you.